Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to our channel and thanks for logging on. If you enjoy these videos, do me a favor right now and subscribe to our YouTube channel right here at Watchbox Reviews. I'd really appreciate it, and I'd be able to send watches like this to your inbox as early as tomorrow morning. If you like this watch, well, you can buy it and its friends on our website, thewatchbox.com. Buy, trade, and sell luxury watches 24 hours a day and globally on thewatchbox.com. Today, we are discussing a real plank owner of an important Rolex model line. This is the first Rolex Explorer II. The model launched in 1971, the reference 1655, a timepiece originally developed for cave explorers. So if you were spelunking inside the earth, you might need an AM/PM dial to clarify whether you're looking at, for example, 5 p.m. or 5 a.m. And of course, the logic being that this is the most specialized of Rolex sports watches. Nevertheless, it has broad appeal, and this being the earliest variant with a serial number of roughly 3.2 million, hailing from 1972, this is an excellent example of a survivor from the earliest series. So I always prefer my vintage watches to show some evidence that they're actually the claimed age, and it's better to have a worn but not worn out vintage watch rather than one that looks too good to be true. Now, everything about this watch screams first generation. The bezel, the dial, the giant orange triangular index for the 24-hour hand, and of course the needle style straight seconds hand. Let's talk a little bit about the fit, and then we'll talk all about those features. So 39 millimeters, it is smaller than a contemporary Explorer II by a fair margin. Of course, the timepiece, being a vintage Rolex, it has a charm to it that means though it is small, it doesn't look petite. It looks purposeful. The timepiece is relatively thick because of the vintage plexiglass, always thicker than a sapphire, so 13.2 millimeters thick, still dressable if you want to wear this with formal attire, and many people do wear vintage sports watches with suits. You'll also find that 47.2 millimeters lug-to-lug makes this a very viable watch on smaller wrists. If you can't wear a modern Explorer II at 42 millimeters, you have to consider this one. It's an excellent match for wrists as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference. The lug spacing, should you wish to accessorize, 20 millimeters, so you can have a world of options, and of course back in the day, perforated lugs meant a strap tool can quickly and easily swap out. The bracelet is a vintage piece in its own right. As you can see, it is a Rolex 9315 with folded links. It is an E serial, which means it was made in 1980. All of the original identifying marks for the 9315 as well as the 380 end pieces blazon on the back of the watch. The interior of the clasp in outstanding condition. And the watch does feature a Rolex flip lock extension, so should you wish to extend it, probably not for diving these days, but perhaps over a thick winter coat, you have that functionality, as well as many individual strap tool holes for fine adjustments. So this is a period bracelet, though the bracelet is considerably newer than the watch itself. The bracelet from 1980, the watch from 1972. Now, 3.2 million is well within the serial range for this first generation needle seconds hand and the large orange index for the 24-hour. Both of these were phased out by the end of the 70s, but the needle hand went first. The orange arrow disappeared after the mid-70s. The needle hand lasted all of about 3 model years from the release in 1971. So to have both of them present and correct is quite a distinction for a watch that also has an outstanding original dial. Now, it is a Mark I dial, it is tritium, it is in wonderful condition, there is no tarnishing, there's no damage. We'll get as close as we possibly can here because these things matter with vintage Rolex. But as you can see, it's not a rail dial, so sorry to disappoint, but it is original and it's in outstanding condition. All too often, patina is sold as something objectively desirable when reality is that it's just a way of apologizing for damage. Well, other than the fading of the tritium on the dial and the matching hands, you'll note no degradation of this dial. It really looks as though it has never been opened. Now, you'll find that the bezel is original, but somewhat weather worn, but you'll note that the indications themselves, while they've lost some lacquer, remain deep and visible. It's not as though anyone's ever taken a buffing wheel to that bezel, and it remains immensely readable. You can see all of your cardinal marks for judging the originality of an Explorer II 1655 bezel, the 1s, the 2s, the 4s, full disclosure, know what you're getting. Okay, now you can see that the watch features open 9s and 6s, reasonably full lugs that are even from side to side. I'm not going to claim the watch has never been refinished. It's been refinished a few times, but it's in excellent condition, and you'll note that in no instance does the spring bar protrude out of the lug flank. That for me is always a little bit of a red line with vintage Rolex. Here you can see that the lugs, again, though not untouched, remain relatively full, and this is an outstanding example of its kind. A handsome watch, a versatile watch, and with the 24-hour indicator, even a little bit more useful than a vintage sub. Now the timepiece does feature a clean profile because unlike the GMT of the same era, it doesn't have a rotating bezel. The timepiece does, however, have a 100-meter water-resistant case and an older twin-lock crown. Nevertheless, I do not recommend diving or even swimming with any vintage watch, and for our purposes, we'll call that watch is over 30 years old. Nevertheless, the watch was built stoutly in the beginning, and I have a feeling that that extra measure of hermeticity is precisely why the dial itself remains so solid and unmarred. Inside the case, underneath the case back, Rolex caliber 1575 automatic winding, 48-hour power reserve, 26 joules. This was back in the era of the single-sided balance bridge, not a full balance bridge, but a single-sided balance cock, and the quirky 19,800 vibration per hour beat rate of the 1570 series. Now, of course, this is not a dual-time watch. I need to be very clear. What you're looking at is a 24-hour hand that is synced to the local hour hand. So, for example, if you are looking at 6 a.m., you're going to see that 24-hour hand is at 3 because it moves at half speed and it's permanently coupled to the local hour hand. So you can never set one to an entirely different time zone. And you'll note as I approach 12 with the local hour hand, you can see quite clearly, because we're all cave explorers, that it is 12 noon, not 12 midnight. Finally, it's important to note the watch does feature hacking seconds. This was something implemented in 1971. This watch having a 1972 serial, it does feature the convenience of hacking seconds. However, you're still on your own regarding setting of the date. The quick set was not available on this caliber. Also important, it's still a chronometer, COSC certified with a Breguet overcoil hairspring and a free sprung balance. Even then, Rolex was a stickler for durability and accuracy. These older movements are tough, reliable, and serviceable by any knowledgeable local watchmaker, which is a nice thing because though this is a bit of an exotic as a well-preserved original first-gen Explorer II, nevertheless, it's not mechanically exotic in the difficult-to-service sense. A handsome watch, a charming vintage piece, dial-wise and bezel-wise, a fantastic survivor with a solid case and a handsome period clasp and bracelet. You can see and you can own this Rolex 1655, sometimes, though apocryphally nicknamed the Steve McQueen, on our website.